This is a clip I saw on Instagram of a Bloom Pop episode. Maybe we'll react to that one. And what this woman said, people weren't digging. Here we go.
May I ask where you're from?
I'm from South Sudan.
Okay. I mean, I'm African, but honestly, I like Americanized African men. He's just a little too African.
What the?
Not in any insulting way, honestly.
I'm not, if you know.
That's a weird thing to say.
You know what, Rob? That is a weird thing to say. However, I feel like I know what she was trying to say. But let's watch the whole video before I speak on it.
So what made you say he's too African?
Oh,
I think the strong facial features, yeah.
Girl, what?
Okay. Okay, and which part of Africa are you from?
I'm half Kenyan, half Ghanaian, so I'm like East and West.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay.
too African. I need an Americanized African man to take her. Why she gotta say it like that, though? Like, or say that at all?
Okay, so personally for me, she lost me when she said it was the African features, because I was almost like siding with her, like trying to understand where she was coming from, because I know me and my younger sister have spoke on this topic before. So I felt like I kind of understood where she was coming from, but then she started talking about African features and then I lost her. Like I was confused.
Hey, I'm not into your shirt.
But it's crazy because she's also African.
Funny that you said that, Noah, because I'm also African. In fact, I'm Nigerian. I was born in Nigeria and immigrated to America when I was 2 years old. So I feel like I kind of have somewhat of like an opinion on this, because I personally, because I moved to America when I was 2 years old, I don't have too much ties to the actual place of Nigeria, though the culture holds a lot of meaning to me and like in my heart and everything. However, I feel like if you're Nigerian and you know Nigerian men and you just know Africa as a whole, you know that place is ghetto. And you know the men there are just as ghetto. And hopefully when I say ghetto, I hope y'all understand that I'm not talking like the whole country of Nigeria is ghetto, because just as some place in America is considered ghetto and some places in America are considered nice and luxurious, that's the same, that applies the same way in Nigeria. What I'm trying to say is the African men in Nigeria were raised differently than the ones who grew up here in America. And if you're a real Nigerian and you grew up in that culture where you know what real Nigerian men in Africa behave like and the Nigerian men here who have low-key been watered down, you know the difference. And you know which African man is authentically from Africa and which Nigerian man is from America.
Well, there's not really an
Yeah, Arlette didn't look too happy with that answer. She's like, oh, what do you mean? What do you mean it's too African about him?
What does that mean exactly?
What does that mean?
Okay, so let me help y'all try to understand what she was trying to say until she messed it up at the end. It's kind of like how she said, I prefer black men who grew up in the suburbs versus black men who grew up in the hood. And she could have used that on any culture, really. Like, I prefer white men who grew up in the suburbs versus white men who grew up in the hood, because your brain wants to believe that the culture in the suburbs is more civilized than the culture in the hood, similar to the way she was saying the culture in America seems more civilized than the culture in Africa. And that's also not to say that every single man in the hood is going to be ghetto, because I know that's not the case. That's not how people work. The same way that every single man that grows up in the suburbs is not going to be right. Like, there's crazy everywhere. So I think that's kind of what she was trying to say, because I feel like that's kind of what I agree with, where usually African men who grew up in Africa, they be behaving a little differently. I don't know if y'all noticed, than, you know, African men who kind of assimilated with the culture here in America, especially if you prefer the way American men treat the women here. And I felt like that's what she was talking about, but she also just didn't like how he looked. So she kind of messed it up. Because had she said, how attached are you to your culture? Because I don't really like the African culture as much because I grew up in African culture, I think more people would have agreed with her, because you will see all over social media, women be looking out for Nigerian and Ghanaian men because they low-key are toxic. And obviously not all of them, because I already know y'all are gonna be like, well, I'm not toxic, and some men, I'm married to a Ghanaian man and he's not toxic. Well, yeah. Fact is, I'm with an African man too. So I know.
She was commenting on his facial structure being too African, right? But even if you're Americanized, you're having the same facial structure.
Thank you.
It doesn't change. Your facial structure wouldn't change. So what are you talking about? If your parents were born in America but were still African, had you'd look the exact same.
Yes.
Just because you're Americanized, your facial skeletal doesn't change.
Apparently, she thinks that you turn into handsome Squidward when you cross the border into America.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Y'all, I'm not even gonna trip. She lost me here too. Like,
So what made you say he's too African?
Oh,
I think the strong facial features, yeah.
Okay.
no, what is she talking about? Because, like Ryan said, you don't. What is she talking about? You're too African because of your African features. What? Simply just say he's not attractive to you, ma'am. Simply just say he's ugly. Because don't be saying it's because he's African. What? Because now you lost all your validity. Because I agreed with her until she said that part. It didn't make any sense. Even if it's because he has strong African facial features and you're using that to assume that he must be very traditionally African, bold of you to assume that. I look very African. Every African who sees me automatically knows I'm African. I do not act like the stereotypical African. So bold of you to assume just because of those features, he must be very, very African. No.
This is weird. This is so sad. White folks have done a number on us. I don't think, maybe she just said some crazy shit.
No, Ryan, you're not going to believe how many Nigerian women know to avoid Nigerian men because they just tend to be more controlling and more toxic and more abusive, and they don't be acting right. And trust me, I would know, okay? Now, saying this man is too African simply based off how he looks and not how he acts, now that is ridiculous. Because we do not know anything about this man. Like, she could have just said she doesn't like dating Africans, and then I would have at least been like, okay, that's just her preference. Now she's over here making stuff up.
I'm confused. Both of y'all are full-blooded African, but he's too African because of his features aren't Americanized enough. But how does one do that? What does that even mean? You know what? Never mind.
You know, what is that? We don't understand. She don't know what she's saying.
My best guess is that it means he's not mixed because you can't have Americanized features otherwise. Yeah, exactly.
What?
Well, what's an Americanized feature?
It ruined her argument right when she said that because it doesn't make any sense.
Well,
okay, I get too African, whatever. That's really your stance. It's like, okay, he has an accent or whatever, but saying the structure, but you want someone who's Americanized, it doesn't go.
Right, because what is an American feature? Like, is that just being white? Because if that's the case, just say you prefer white men and stop adding all this fluff to it. You know what I'm saying? Because that's really just how some people prefer their men, you know? Now, let's say he even came to the set with a full-on African accent, full-on traditional African clothing. That still does not define how African he is. If a white man showed up speaking in an African accent and an African attire, does that automatically make him more African than me, who was born there and knows the actual traditions and cultures and speaks the language? No. And just because I look more African than my younger sister does not make her less African than me and does not make me more African than her, if y'all guys understand what I'm trying to say.
yeah, then you can't criticize the facial structure. It must maybe criticize his clothing and say that he's got a very traditional Ghanaian wardrobe or something, and maybe that's it or whatever.
I understand what Ryan is trying to say, but even so, like, this the fit, not the man. Even if he's in full-on African clothes, like I was saying, it doesn't really matter on how he behaves. Now, if he starts beating you because you decided to speak up for yourself, or he's like, where's my food, after you just worked your own 12-hour shift, that's when it starts getting loco. You know what I'm saying? So, like, that's a whole different story. But I think we all get the point. Like, I feel like had she had worded the way she was trying to say it differently, she would have still got hate, don't get me wrong, but at least some people would have understand where she was coming from. That being said, guys, believe it or not, my main takeaway from this video is not that all African men suck, because that is not true. My main takeaway is that you cannot judge a book by its cover, like this woman was saying. You cannot be too African based off of your features. You cannot be too Asian based off your features. You cannot be too white based off your features. You can be anybody you are based on how you behave, right? And I actually think a lot of the African traditions and values that we hold in Nigeria, where I'm from, I actually really like it, even more so than some of the traditions here in America, where a woman actually respects her husband and treats him like the head of the household, and a man uplifts the woman and treats her like the prize that she is. So I feel like there's some things I take from Nigerian culture and some things I take from American culture, but I also understand where it can be like, oh, I prefer a man who has less African traditions. And some people can say, I prefer a man who has more Arabic traditions or more African traditions. It just depends on the woman. I really love hearing people out. So if y'all have a different opinion or y'all completely disagree with what I said, please like share that below. Like, I'm ready to discuss, chat. I'm ready. Okay. Just, be respectful, and I will be respectful too. Anyways, that was the video, and thank you guys so much for watching.